The following program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
It's 5:30. A worried 8-year-old girl, Kirsten Kosub, calls her mother, Rachel, at work. No answer.
Kristen had not been picked up from the babysitter. You just know that there's something wrong.
Hours tick by, and still no word from the young girl's mother. In a panic, Rachel's sisters drive to the design store where she works. Her car is in the parking lot. They immediately call her employers, Dean and Sandra Murphy.
They wanted us down at the shop because Rachel was missing. It was not like Rachel to not be in contact with her family.
We went down to the office. I saw police cars down there. Her car was there and the lights were on. In your heart, you know this is not right.
The door was locked.
There's an office up front.
The large showroom was to my right, and her office was up to my left. I went that way, and the officer and her sister went into the other direction. I went in to her office and found that her purse and everything was still there. Had a very sickening feeling. Then we heard her sister cry out. That's where they found her.
San Antonio homicide arrived to a brutal scene. Rachel is lying face down at the bottom of the staircase in the main showroom. A noose fashioned from her own pantyhose is around her neck.
This was an unusual murder. This wasn't a scene where somebody had gotten shot or somebody had broken into the house. You knew that there was a sexual assault involved. You knew that this was a strangulation with her pantyhose. This is going to be a very unusual type situation.
Her clothing is torn. Her hands are behind her back. Paper and debris are strewn around the body, all signs of a violent struggle. Yet nothing has been taken, and no signs of forced entry at the small house, which is now a design store.
How did this person get in there? How did this happen? What happened? Why did they do it? We did have murders where females were strangled, but this was going to be a little different because of the way she was strangled, the way she was found.
So Rachel, if you wouldn't mind helping me make a list, we have a really big client coming in.
Detective Urbanek questions the store's owners, Dean and Sandra, about the 32-year-old mom.
The other day, I found something I'm really happy with.
Rachel was very, very, very nice person.
Okay, we are going to need to...
Any of our customers who would come in, they'd always say Rachel was so nice, and she always had a smile for everybody, you know. She was a stay-at-home mother until then. Always had something to tell us about Kristen.
Rachel was very devoted to Kristen. It was her life.
It's kind of an emergency. I really need to talk to him.
Rachel's sisters have the terrible task of telling Rachel's husband, Clifford, his wife is dead. He left for New York on business earlier that day. The sisters call and call his hotel, but there's no answer.
Whenever a woman is found dead and she's married, a lot of people look at the husband.
Clifford Koseb finally calls from New York.
Yeah. Well, hello, Mr. Kosef.
Why has it taken him so long to call about his wife's murder?
Yeah, he's on his way down. That's right.
The police thought he might have been a suspect. Could he have committed this offense?
I was in New York.
Detectives question Clifford about his marriage. Was there trouble? Under the spotlight, he admits having a fight with Rachel the morning she died.
I left for New York.
We had some indication that there might have been some marital strife between Rachel Koseb and Clifford.
Talk about it when you come back.
There may have been some bad feelings between his side of the family and Rachel's side of the family. Rachel's side of the family suspected that he was involved in it.
But are their marriage problems enough to push him to murder? Lots of couples have issues. And more important, did he have the time to do it? When detectives drill down on the timeline, they conclude the husband's alibi is bulletproof. He was in New York when his wife was murdered.
In terms of the reports, it was clear that he was out of town at the time the offense happened.
I have the airline ticket stubs.
Asked about his marital problems, Clifford says he and Rachel fought like any couple. End of story.
Why would you lie?
No, I'm being honest.
The same day, coroner Susanna Dana conducts the autopsy.
She had the typical findings in a ligature strangulation of the marked congestion of the face, petechial hemorrhages or little blood vessels popping in the face from the pressure of the ligature.
The pantyhose around her neck were so tight, the medical examiner had a very hard time actually cutting the pantyhose off of her neck.
There was also signs that her wrists had been bound, probably behind her back. There was some little pieces of residue, kind of like from a tape, around the wrists. Since she was found face down at the scene, and the ligature was tightly tied around her neck, I felt like the assailant probably was on her back. As part of the external examination of the body, one thing I would do is take what they call a sexual assault kit. That involves taking cotton tip swabs and putting them in the vagina, the rectum, and the mouth so that those can be used then to prepare slides to look for sperm.
During the medical examiner's investigations, they determined that she had been sexually assaulted. She was brutalized.
The rape kit evidence and pantyhose are stored for safekeeping. With no leads, detectives turn to the other employees at Sandra Murphy Design. One of them, Susan, remembers talking to Rachel on the phone around 10 that morning, and Rachel wasn't alone. She says there was a man in the shop looking for ceiling fans.
And she asked Susan where were the fan catalogs. And Susan told her that they were in the back room.
A neighborhood canvas comes up empty. No one saw anything suspicious.
We wanted to get this guy very bad, but we just didn't have anything.
The case cools, and the months roll by. Then, a year after the murder, a violent rape in a neighboring town reignites the case.
I just kept telling him, I said, you know, don't take the money and go. Take the money. He didn't want the money. I really thought he was going to kill me.
Despite its bloody past, San Antonio, home to the Alamo, is in the top 10 safest cities in the United States.
San Antonio is unique in that we are a small, big city.
We have fabulous restaurants here, good shopping. It's just a great place to live.
This is why the rape and murder of 32-year-old Rachel Koseb comes as such a shock. An 8-year-old girl is told her mother will never come home.
It was such a terrible, terrible thing to happen.
A year has passed when a violent sexual assault in a town 19 miles outside of San Antonio breathes new life into the investigation.
It was an engineering placement center. I was the secretary. Everything was done via the phone and the mail. So for somebody to come in, they either had an appointment or they were lost. This man who came in was, I thought, lost. He was asking about some certain business. He asked me, if this business was in the complex. So I tried to help him to locate where the office was.
Just down the street, so I'll just show you.
But that's not what he was looking for. He pulled a knife out of his pocket. He just grabbed my hands and started yelling at me. I couldn't fight him. He was much stronger than I was. I thought he wanted to rob me, and I said, "My wallet's over there." He dragged me up the stairs. He pushed me on the floor. He tied up my hands and feet. And he just kept yelling at me. I keep thinking, this can't be happening. This cannot be happening. He took my driver's license. He told me he knew where I lived. And he said that if I told anybody, that he would come after me again, and I'd be really sorry. I really thought as soon as he was done, he was going to take that knife and slash my throat. He cut the tape on my hands and my feet. Then he left. I was real worried because I thought maybe he's still down there. Maybe he's waiting for me. I don't know. I don't know how long I waited. I was terrified to get up.
Eventually, someone in the complex finds Mary Jane and calls the police. When they arrive, she learns she's not the first victim. A serial rapist is on the loose. Live Oak detective Gary Hopper is assigned to track him down.
There began a series of sexual assaults in the Northeast area. That got everybody's attention. Violent sexual assaults are not everyday occurrences here.
From the victims' accounts, Hopper's team makes a composite sketch of the attacker.
So I called the television networks and asked if I could get this composite put on the news that evening at 6 o'clock.
The tiny police department is swamped with calls. Most are false leads. Except for one.
Well, it was kind of a hectic morning, and everybody had to answer phones. This one gentleman called, and he says, "I think my wife knows who your person is." And I said, well, can I talk to your wife? And he said, no. Said, she doesn't want to get involved. So, you know, I'm going to give you the information, and then you go from there. She worked for a small construction company. Nobody else is around. She told me the minute this man walked in, she said she was just automatically afraid of him. Scared to death. It was the way he looked at her. She said he had these eyes like the shark, kind of look right through you.
I was wondering if you had any...
He starts asking her if they have any jobs, you know, if the boss around. And she said, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to protect myself. So she said, I told him, hey, the boss has just left. He went down the street to 7-Eleven, which was right around the corner. He's getting me coffee and him some coffee, and he'll be back just a few minutes. And if you're interested in a job, you know, you can speak to him. He said, no, I don't have time to wait. You know, I'll come back later. As the gentleman left the building, she got up, walked, and wrote his license plate down.
Hopper here.
The car belongs to 35-year-old Mike Dossett, a local carpenter living in a quiet Live Oak neighborhood.
Mike Dossett?
We went to his house, knocked on the door. His wife answered the door. We asked if Mr. Dossett was there. She said, sure. He came around the corner, and I was just, you know, I bet you my mouth dropped open.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
It was the composite. It was him.
What can I do for you?
I told him that I was with the Live Oak Police Department, and I had an incident that had taken place the day before, and I'd like to see if he would come to the police department voluntarily and speak with us about it.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And he agreed and came to Live Oak PD with us.
Mr. Dossett, you have to remain silent. Everything you say can will be used against you in the court of law.
I read him his rights.
You can't afford an attorney.
He told me he understood his rights. I asked him, I said, do you want to speak with me? He said, sure.
I feel that you have some...
I told him these ladies were attacked, and I thought that he may have some knowledge of the rapes.
Nothing.
He denied it. He told me, no, never been in that store. You know, I don't do that. I'm a good person.
On the face of it, Dossett doesn't look like a serial rapist turned murderer. Married with 4 kids, he umpires Little League in his spare time and has no priors.
No.
I continued to question him about it. When you would hit certain things with him, he would look at you and you could see there was another side to this man.
There's nothing really I can say.
So after several minutes of questioning him and getting a little frustrated with him, I took the composite out. And I just reached across and I handed it to him. It was folded. And I told him, open that up and tell me who that is. And he opened up the composite. He looked down at it, and he looked up at me.
Yes, that's me.
And he said, that's me. I'm the one that did it.
Mike Dossett starts confessing, fast and furious, to all the rapes in the area.
Except the woman that was working.
I wanted it over. I wanted it to end.
I dragged her into an office.
It was the only way it was going to stop. I wanted to be caught, so I couldn't do it anymore.
I grabbed her from behind.
So that it would no longer happen.
I raped her.
He said, hey, there's a good side of me and there's a very evil side of me. And he said, I can't control that evil side. At that point, he looked at me and he told me that I've got this horrible dream that I continue to have. It bothers me.
I'm standing on the stairs with the handrail around me. And I'm standing up on it, looking out, and there's a body laying there. Whether or not they're dead or alive, I honestly can't tell.
And there's this woman.
Dossett's dream is eerily familiar to Detective Hopper.
This woman, I feel
The minute he says it, I'm going, my God, that's Rachel Casa.
In Live Oak, Texas, Mike Dossett, a mild-mannered Little League umpire, confesses to a string of violent rapes. Then, he tells investigators about a chilling dream. Is this some bizarre way of confessing he killed Rachel Kosub?
At no point in the dream am I attacking anybody. I'm standing on that stairway and there's a person. They don't look alive, but there's no way I can tell.
Mike, are you ready for confession?
And I'm going, holy cow, not only is this the guy that was raping these ladies out here, this is the guy that killed Rachel Kosub a year ago.
I get that. I can see this woman.
Rachel Kosub's murder got everybody's attention. I'd been there as a customer, and I knew where her desk was, and I knew what he was talking about. I've been on that staircase.
Are you willing to write this down?
I asked him some more, and he keeps going. I said, well, what do you want, Mike? What do you want? He said, I need some help. He says, because this is really bothering me. And I said, well, I'm going to get you some help.
Hi, it's Detective Hopper from Live Oaks PD.
I called SAPD Homicide, and I said, hey, I've got this guy here in my office, and I'm sure this is the person that killed Rachel Kosub. And he goes, why? And I said, well, he just told me the crime scene.
Detective Hopper makes the 20-mile drive with Mike Dossett to San Antonio PD
Hey, guys.
Okay, listen, I gotta let you go.
to find out if his gut feeling is true.
Hey, now, Detective Hopper, Wolf.
They had the case ready for me, so I could see if what he was saying really matched up.
We had a few things here that we wanted to show you.
One of the photographers had taken a photograph from that banister looking down over the crime scene. The body of Rachel Kosub was there, and it was just exactly what Mike Dossett was telling me about.
That's our guy.
I said, this is the man. He's the one that killed her. There's no doubt in my mind.
Well, I don't know about
Detective Urbanick, the original investigator for Rachel's murder, grills Mike Dossett.
He told me all about his dream, and I would ask him if he wanted to put his dream down on paper, and he would say, well, I'd rather talk to a doctor.
Any of these ring a bell?
Detectives Urbanick and Wolf play good cop, bad cop.
You remember this one?
The investigator worked it, talking about penalties and punishments and stuff like that. And at that point, something happened, and Mr. Dossett kind of turned off. He would tell us the story, but he wouldn't confess. He wouldn't write it down.
I want to talk.
Dossett retained an attorney, and he decided he wasn't going to talk to us anymore.
And I said, I'm not confessing to anything I did not do. I can't do it. I have no clue why I attacked the women that I did attack. Somebody that does something like that is looking for dominance. That's the only thing that I can think of as to why I was binding them and committing the assaults. Other than that, I have no clue why. What happened to Rachel Kosub, you'd have to ask the person that did that. And you're not asking him right now. I did not rape Rachel Kosub, nor did I kill Rachel Kosub.
Admitting to a creepy nightmare is not the same as confessing to Rachel's murder. Without a confession and with no evidence, there's no case against Mike Dossett.
There was no question in my mind that Mike Dossett was the murderer. His description of inside the place and where she was located, he knew stuff that only the murderer would know.
In 1985, 8 months after being arrested, Mike Dossett is convicted of multiple rapes and sent to prison. For his victims, justice is served.
At least I knew he was incarcerated somewhere, so he still couldn't come to my house. You don't know what's going through these people's heads. Who knows what he would do?
As it turns out, Mike Dossett doesn't stay in jail for long.
I served 8 years and 8 months on this 25-year sentence, and then was on mandatory supervision for the additional 16 years and 4 months.
A free man, and now divorced from his first wife, Mike Dossett tries to rebuild his life and begins to date again.
Well, my name is Trudy Linda Cantu Dossett, but if you're my friend, you call me Linda. Mike and I met in 1993. We were working together, and he had children and I had children. I said, well, where do you go to church? And he says, well, I don't have a church. I'm looking for one. I said, well, why don't you come to church with me? And so then we started dating. Well, the first time we went out, Mike said, well, I need to tell you something.
There is something I need to tell you.
And I said, okay, what is it? And he says, well, I have been in prison for the last 8 years. And I said, oh, really? What did you go to prison for?
Want to tell me why? Aggravated.
He said,
assault.
aggravated sexual assault. And I said, okay, is that the same as rape? And he said, yes. And I says, oh. So he told me about the case. I said, well, how do you feel about it? And he said, well, I'm sorry for it, but I did confess to it, and I've served my time. Well, being a Christian, I believe in forgiveness. I thought that was a terrible crime. I wouldn't want it happen to me. I repeatedly told Mike, I can't believe that you did this. And he says, well, I was going through a very difficult time. I was unemployed. I didn't have a job. I didn't have money. I was very depressed. Having been exposed to people who are depressed, I understand that it changes a person.
5 or 6 months later, we were dating, fell in love, and I asked her to marry me.
When we decided to get married, I said, again, you need to go ask my children if you can marry me and see how they feel about it. And he asked each one of them individually, and each one of them said, if this is what my mother wants and my mother's happy, that's all we care about.
Despite bearing his deepest secrets to his new wife, Dossett never mentions his eerie dream about the dead body. A convicted rapist gets his life back on track. Others are not so lucky. Sandra and Dean Murphy are unable to set foot in the place where Rachel Kosub was murdered.
We ended up selling the business. It was very difficult coming into the office.
People used to come in and they would say, I can't stay here. I see her face everywhere I look. And they'd leave. It was just a very bad time.
In 1995, 12 years after the murder, Rachel's husband dies. Some still believe he killed his wife.
Clifford passed away knowing that the person who did this to Rachel was not found. It just must have really been hard on him.
Well, my father was the suspect in the case, and
Rachel's daughter, Kirsten, now 20, is determined to find the man who really killed her mother
he passed away from cancer recently.
and clear her father's name once and for all. She calls San Antonio PD, pleading with the detectives to reopen the case.
Still under investigation.
Kristen was really important in bringing this case forward.
It's been so long.
Her persistence and just her efforts to make sure that somebody took a look at this case to see what needed to be done.
Bye-bye.
One cop, Detective Tim Britt, hears her plea and decides to help. Right off the bat, Britt has a big problem.
They couldn't find the case. They didn't know where the case was.
It's been 12 years since Rachel Kosub was raped and murdered in broad daylight while working at a San Antonio design business.
The Rachel Kosub case is a case that I just never forgot. I never forgot Michael Dossett.
Detective Gary Hopper lives in fear that his #1 suspect will take another life.
How long is it going to be before this animal, the evil part of Mike Dossett, starts turning again, and when's he going to start attacking the women again?
Meanwhile, Mike Dossett still denies that he is the murderer.
No, the only reason I can't confess to this one is that I did not do it.
A murder case.
Under pressure from Rachel's daughter Kirsten, Detective Tim Britt brings some much-needed heat to this cold case. But he hits a major roadblock.
Well, Tim's big problem with this case was they couldn't find the case. The case file was gone. All the photographs were gone. They had one single sheet that had information about the dates and times and stuff like that. Tim knew that I had been involved in it, so he wanted me to come and speak with him about the case and give him the facts that I knew.
10 years ago, I interviewed this guy, and literally he told me, he brought me through the whole crime scene in a dream scenario.
I went over the dream that Mike had told me and about how he told me that he was standing on that staircase looking down at this lady, and he knew he had something to do with it.
They had the actual Polaroid.
And they had that photograph, and I said, yeah, I know Michael Dossett did it.
Here, look at this.
I told Tim, man, I said, you know, I've been living with this for over 10 years. This has bothered me.
That's Mike Dossett.
I was excited that they was looking at this case again.
I waited 10 years for this guy to get busted.
Kind of gave me some more hope.
Tell me about that, Rachel.
Detective Britt hauls Mike Dossett into the station to grill him yet again over the incriminating dream.
Michael, of course, had spent time in the penitentiary, so now he was a lot sharper as far as the law goes and what we could do and not do. Here again, it was very frustrating because this guy was out walking the streets.
When I talked to Detective Britt in '95, he had to prompt me in several things. It was more what Britt wanted said than what I said.
I tell you what, Mike, you're going to do me a favor.
Again, Dossett stonewalls. But now, San Antonio PD have a new forensic tool that has revolutionized murder investigations.
In 1983, when Rachel was murdered, there was no DNA. About the only thing we did back in that day and time was blood type. They had a rape kit, it was somewhere, and that rape kit had semen in it. Find this rape kit, we can find out if it was Michael Dossett.
Tim Britt had obtained a sample from Mike Dossett that we could use for comparison against the rape kit.
And now there's an even bigger problem. And this one's a doozy.
The rape kit couldn't be found. Without that, it was going to be impossible to tie any evidence together.
Angry and frustrated, Detective Britt quits the San Antonio police force. Before he leaves, he makes one last call to Kirsten and tells her something she didn't know. Mike Dossett has been a prime suspect in her mother's death for 11 years, a convicted rapist who is now free. In 2002, Kirsten emails a new cold case unit at San Antonio PD. It lands in Detective George Sadler's inbox.
Christian was looking for some very strong closure. If she could solve this case, if she could push forward and get answers, that she felt like this would help.
Sadler takes a quick look at the Rachel Kosub case file and is amazed to discover it barely exists.
General reports of what had happened at the crime scene about how the victim was found and who had responded. That was it. There was no follow-up detective reports, crime scene investigator reports, no crime scene photographs, just 4 or 5 general police reports of officers that made the scene, might have secured the scene. There was nothing in the immediate file that we would keep in the file now.
The files don't even mention prime suspect Mike Dossett and his disturbing dream. The cold case detective learns this information from the victim's daughter.
During interrogation, he described...
She was telling me about a suspect that I was not aware of. She was telling me about a statement she was aware of that the suspect supposedly gave to a detective. She was aware of some DNA work that was being done on her.
Telling them about a body beneath the banister.
She had a lot more information than I had in the case file.
I wasn't aware of that.
At that point, I was a little confused because I wasn't sure what she was talking about, but very interesting and certainly something to follow up on.
Like Detective Britt before him, Sadler hits the archives, looking for a needle in a haystack.
First thing is try to retrieve the file from our archives unit. In this case here, I was unable to find one.
Blindly working through the dusty, unmarked boxes, he gets lucky. Somehow, he finds the autopsy files and the pantyhose used to choke Rachel Kosub.
I called out to the lab and asked if there was any new technique since '94 even that we could do to try and find DNA on skin cells. And he said to go ahead and send it back out and he would have his people take a look at it. I sent the pantyhose back out to be examined, only to get negative. They couldn't find anything. You go along, you get these leads, you think you're getting close to solving this case, you think you got enough to file the case. It's like getting kicked in the groin, I tell you.
There's one last hope. Find the missing rape kit and use the DNA to catch the killer.
I had just read the autopsy report, and it stated that there was an abundance of sperm. I started looking in local archives, doing hand searching of reports requests, and contacting our different units that might have been involved in the investigation at one point or another, like our latent fingerprint examination section, our crime lab.
Finally, in the back of a freezer at the Bexar County Medical Examiner's office, sitting there for almost 2 decades, is the rape kit. It's been poorly stored and badly degraded. Will there be any DNA left? And will it match Mike Dossett or someone else?
I got a report back from the crime lab, and it said no DNA found. I mean, I'm feeling like my whole case is going down here.
After 20 years, the mystery of who killed Rachel Kosub remains up in the air. Tests on the moldy rape kit can't find any DNA. Maybe San Antonio police have been wrong about prime suspect Mike Dossett all this time.
How do we go from all of this to my report simply said no DNA found? So I called the lab and spoke to the technician, and he said, well, you have to understand some of it gets degraded. It wasn't packaged right back then. I said, well, if there's something else to do on it, I said, do it. I don't care if you use it all up. This is my last shot.
The rape kit is sent to a second lab and put through the very latest techniques in DNA analysis.
Detective Sadler.
I received a phone call from the crime lab, and he says, I know I'm going to regret this, he says, but
yes,
I've got Dossett's DNA. I made it in the rape kit. I called the district attorney's office right away, and I said, I've got his DNA. I'm going to walk a warrant for his arrest. And they said, go ahead.
I was coming home from shopping, and Mike was out in the yard working on the fence. 2 detectives were there and said, we're taking him downtown. And I said, what are you taking him downtown for? They said, he is being arrested for murder. And I said, murder?
Mike. Hey. We got the results back from your DNA.
I said, look, I've got your DNA.
And it's a perfect match.
And he says DNA can be wrong.
Well, obviously, there's some mistake in DNA.
I explained to him in not so uncertain terms that unless his penis got off of him and walked over there by itself at the murder scene, that he was in fact my killer. And we terminated the interview.
Okay. That's what we wanted to
I have no clue as to how my DNA could have got there. I never had sex with Mrs. Gossett.
I booked him for murder.
I knew that they were going to find Mike Dossett's DNA in there. There was no doubt in my mind. It was like Christmas.
Police say no doubt Mike Dossett assumed he got away with murder.
Thank God for DNA.
But Rachel Kosub's brother kept faith that this day would come. Police say Dossett has been a suspect for several years.
In January 2005, the trial begins.
Dossett's defense attorneys argue their client didn't kill Kosub, and the DNA evidence lost for 2 decades was likely mishandled and compromised over the years.
99.9% of all people were excluded as the donor of that particular semen.
When I sat in that courtroom, it was like an outer body experience. You're sitting here watching somebody that you've been married to for 11 years, and you're thinking, did I really know this person?
To bolster their case, the prosecution puts Dossett's 2 rape victims on the stand.
The prosecution had 2 rape victims testify Dossett came to their place of business in 1983 and 84.
He attacked me. And he told me all the time not to move because he had that knife and it was right next to my head. I don't know why he killed her and he didn't kill me. Obviously, he's a very sick, sick man. Thank God that there is DNA, is all I could say.
My children were not afraid of Mike. As a matter of fact, at the trial, my children were all 3 there. And they all 3 said that they were not afraid of him. And they had never seen a violent side to Mike. And my family could not even imagine Mike could do this. They just couldn't visualize it because they had known him and they didn't see that.
Then the 20-year-old dream that describes the Rachel Kosub crime scene comes back to haunt Dossett.
The judge ruled that that was admissible and the jury could hear the dream sequence to determine whether or not it truly was a confession by Mike Dossett. Mike Dossett described the location which Rachel Kosub had been found in great detail.
She worked by herself that day. And she had a lot of paperwork she needed to do.
Mr. Dossett walked into her office. Nobody else is around.
One of the girls who worked there called and asked Rachel if she wanted some help. And she said no, she was fine.
He was setting her up,
Can I help you with something?
finding out if she's all by herself.
Why don't you come to the front?
Said he was looking for fans.
Ceiling fans?
Yeah, actually in the back.
The fan catalogs were in the back room. That's how he tricked her.
He had his rape package together, which had tape, a knife. He came back and he attacked her.
Her hands had been tied behind her back with duct tape. There was a sexual assault
she was strangled with her pantyhose.
The verdict? Guilty. In January 2005, Mike Dossett is sentenced to 40 years in prison. He denies he committed the murder.
I did commit the crimes that I confessed to, but I did not kill Rachel Casa.
Apart from his wife, few others believe him.
Mike is a very gentle person. I never, in all the years I have known Mike, ever seen him violent. It's hard for me to imagine.
Kristen, she stood up and she said he deprived her of a mother all those years, which he did. She said, you will never, ever see probation because I will always be here. I remember that. She just yelled at him. So I hope he never does get out. I think Rachel would have been proud of her. And her family, too.
It's taken 22 years to put a predator behind bars and find justice for Rachel Cosa.
The nice thing was that people hadn't given up on this case. We always knew that Michael had done it. DNA proved that he had done this. It was great.
He never got away with it. That's the thing that I cherish the most.